Hey, what's up, folks? How you doing? Welcome to yet another episode of Cafeteria Science. And in this particular episode, all I want to do is react to a conversation that was aired on the Within Reason podcast between Alex O'Connor and Sean Carroll. This is one of those few conversations I waited for almost like the longest time. And the ironic thing, the primary reason why I wanted Alex and Sean Carroll to talk is two reasons. The first reason is both Alex and Sean Carroll are people I find inspiring and people who've shaped 90% of my thinking and my approach to life and science and philosophy. And so seeing the two of your best people sit down and talk is obviously something very interesting. The second reason is Sean Carroll has always been this physicist and this scientist always painted as somebody who's slightly more in tune with the philosophical approach to answering the questions about life and the universe. And him talking to Alex, who's all out on philosophy, I thought would be a very interesting conversation. And something I found quite startling right from the start of the conversation is, for some reason, almost like naively, I thought Alex and Sean Carroll are going to be constantly agreeing in this particular conversation on all the fundamental questions about life, the universe, and our human experience. But it turned out that they did not agree on most of the fundamental questions. And Sean Carroll came out almost purely naturalistic in his approaches and almost purely painfully physicalist. I had least expected that. I thought maybe Sean would be slightly more leaning towards less materialistic approaches to the universe and questions about life and all that stuff. But it was the opposite. And that's what primarily made the discussion very, very interesting. And the conversation is 1 hour long, but sorry to disappoint you. I'm not going to react to the whole thing. I'm just here to talk about the first 18 minutes of the conversation because that's the part I found particularly interesting. I won't talk about fine tuning and all those things they got into after that point because those things didn't resonate with me on a deeper level. Those are conversations I've had over and over and over again. I just want to comment on the first part of the conversation. And for questions where they get into consciousness and the limits of science to explain the human experience with regards to consciousness, qualia, subjective experience, Alex O'Connor gets into conversations about Mary's room, the thought experiment, Thomas Nagel, and how he criticizes the overly reductionist, materialistic approaches to understanding consciousness. That's another space to get into. I'm not fully interested. Not that I'm not interested in that, but I've talked about that many times. And in the video where I was reviewing Alex O'Connor's conversation between Sabine and him, I already talked about the Mary's room thought experiment and the limitations of science in explaining our human conscious, our subjective inner conscious experiences. So I won't get into that here. All I'm interested in here is the conversation that Alex had with Sean Carroll right at the first part of the conversation, where they were talking about the limitations of science. And I took some notes just to help me with my explanation here and to keep track and some sort of like organized approach to my commentary. So like I said, I'm only reacting to the first 18 minutes of the conversation. That's all I'm here to do. Maybe in the next video, I might react to other parts that I find interesting. Because sometimes watching a conversation more than once opens up certain nuances that you missed in the first time you listen to it. So perhaps if I stumble across something that I feel is compelling enough to talk about on this channel, I would definitely do that. So Alex kicks off this conversation with the question, is science on its own enough to understand the universe? And already that sets the tone for the rest of the conversation. I was like, I want to see how Sean Carroll responds to that. And what he says is essentially, yes, science does answer or helps us understand the universe. Maybe perhaps science is limited in helping us understand things like aesthetics and morality because those are actually human conceptions that we ourselves have made up. But overall, what Sean said is essentially science can help you understand the universe. And Alex countered that by simply saying, at best, it seems for the most part that science simply just describes things. It merely just describes things and not necessarily explain anything. So in a sense, it's almost like science doesn't have any deeper explanatory power, because all it does is just describe things the way they are and not necessarily give a deeper explanation of why things are that way. And sure, and this seemed to have slightly rubbed Sean the wrong way. And I understand why that's the case, because even me, somebody who's got more stronger leanings towards the scientific approach to life as opposed to like the philosophical approach to life, that kind of rubbed me in a certain way. The way I listened to that, or the way that sounded to me, is like some sort of trivialization of the scientific approach to explaining the universe and the world around us. So what Sean basically responded with was saying, yes, science has certain limitations. And yes, in nature, science is descriptive as opposed to prescriptive. But science builds these robust models and patterns that helps us understand the present, the past, and the future, in almost precise ways. And there's no room for shock. So science, in that sense, is strong enough to give you some sort of like explanatory power for everything that's happening around you, because science formulates patterns and models to help you understand the universe. And this is the part where Sean Carroll brings in the laws of physics. I know for most people, when they hear the phrase the laws of physics, this sounds almost like a philosophical buzzword. The laws of physics, what are the laws of physics? And the truth is, there isn't really a fundamental list of the laws of physics necessarily. There's no single official list of like something that we could ascribe to as these are the laws of physics. What most physicists and scientists mean when they say the laws of physics is just this is just more like a broad family of fundamental principles that explain the nature of things. And those principles could comprise of things like Newton's law of motion, the law of universal gravitation, conservation laws like the conservation of energy, the conservation of momentum, the conservation of angular momentum, the conservation of electric charge, and also things like the laws of thermodynamics. And this is the first, second, and third law of thermodynamics, and all other related principles. So its laws of physics are essentially just a family of fundamental principles that help us understand the nature of things. Then Sean Carroll decides to make things a little bit more spicy. He says, nothing requires a deeper explanation. There are certain things that would require certain explanations, like things within the universe would require a certain level of explanation at some point, but the universe itself, like why it's here, what it's doing, it's just the universe is a brute fact. The universe does not require any deeper explanation as to why it's here. The universe is just a brute fact, implying it is what it is. Then, rightly so, at this point, Alex invokes the principle of sufficient reason. He says a lot of scientists and physicists that I've talked to subscribe to the principle of sufficient reason, which is that everything that we claim to be true should have an explanation for why it's true. If you follow the principle of sufficient reason, it's just that it's almost like implying that for things to be explained, everything deserves to have some sort of like explanation for why it is the way it is. And Sean Carroll here quickly jumps in and says, look, I can tell you why a lot of those physicists, those scientists, and those philosophers are wrong for believing or for subscribing to the principle of sufficient reason, because not everything deserves to have an explanation. Perhaps maybe things within the universe would compel us to ask the question, or the question would be legitimate to ask it, that why are things like this in the universe? And why is this that way? Why is this that way? Why don't material things just pop out of existence? All those questions can be answered within the universe, and it's justifiable and they're logical questions to ask. But when it comes to the question about the universe, why is the universe here and why is it the way it is? It's just a brute fact. It's just a brute fact that warrants no explanation or reason as to why it is the way it is. Again, it is what it is. So essentially, Sean was trying to argue that some things, yes, happen for a reason, and others just don't. Others just don't have reasons why they happen. And of course, at this point, I was thinking, this sounds a bit off. And Alex also felt rightly the same because he raised this argument like, doesn't that leave us in a terrain where everything is arbitrary? Because how do you even ascribe, how do you draw the distinction between these sets of things are reasonable enough to warrant an explanation, while these sets of things do not have any explanation and there shouldn't be any reason why they don't have any explanation? So Alex asked the question that's almost like a dilemma, you know. He asked, is there an explanation why certain things don't require an explanation? And Sean Carroll pushes back by saying, no, you don't need an explanation because those things, asking such questions, made sense in the past, in Aristotelian times, in the times of Aristotle, all those things. It made sense to try to ascribe the principle of sufficient reason to everything. But now we know so much, and now we have the laws of physics that govern our understanding of nature. You know, it's not everything that's supposed to warrant an explanation and a reason as to why it is the way it is. That's understandable in Aristotle's time and not in our time. And here Alex pushes back to the point that he was trying to push across right from the outset of the conversation, that science is just merely descriptive. It's not prescriptive. You know, so when we talk about the laws of nature, what the laws of nature are explaining are just things around them. They do not bring things into existence. And at this point, Alex said something that's very interesting, that I found very interesting. First, we all know that Newton discovered, or Newton explained, the universal law of gravitation. And there's this apocryphal story of him first coming across that idea by experiencing the falling apple, and thought, hey, why, if the apple is falling this way, why isn't the moon falling in the same way? And this is the point where Alex said something that I found particularly interesting. He said, apples do not fall down because we have the law of gravity, but we have the law of gravity because apples fall down. These laws are descriptive, not prescriptive. They don't bring anything into existence. The laws themselves do not form gravity, do not create gravity. They just explain what is happening. So this is the point where Alex brought everything together in a single question. He said, so if you, Sean Carroll, are trying to replace the principle of sufficient reason with the laws of physics, it's almost as if you are giving the laws of physics this ontological status when they don't have the capacity to bring anything into existence. All they're doing is just describing things that are happening. And if they're just describing things that are happening, can we really say in any substantial sense that they are explaining something deeper? And then Sean was quick to acknowledge that this is a well-debated point in the philosophy of science about humanism versus anti-humanism concerns around the laws of nature. Are the laws of physics bringing into existence what happens next, or they are just explaining it? And this is the part where Sean Carroll was trying to explain Hume's point. He said something like, Hume says, what really happens is we have a bunch of stuff that are happening at different times. And the only thing that the laws of physics are doing is explaining what those bunch of things are doing at different times and not making them do those things. We invent the ways of explaining what these stuff are doing, and we call those ways that we've invented to describe what these things are doing the laws of physics. But here's the interesting part that Sean Carroll was trying to put across. These laws of physics are not just descriptions. They are compact descriptions that cannot be violated by anything. If you remember, some time back on my Substack, I wrote an article saying, could God have created using different sets of laws of physics? The primary argument I was trying to put across is the laws of physics is what Sean Carroll was trying to argue for here. The laws of physics cannot necessarily be violated. They're almost like brute facts. They're just fixed. And because they cannot be violated, and because they follow very strict, rigid patterns, nothing can shock you. Nothing can pop out of existence. Like, nothing is just going to pop out of nowhere. These laws of physics give you a somewhat robust understanding that is all-encompassing of the universe we occupy. Nothing in that universe can shock us that violates the fundamental principles of the laws of physics. And because of that, the laws of physics seem to be doing something much deeper and much bigger than just describing things. And In that, it's almost as if, in as much as he didn't say it out straightforwardly, Sean was trying to argue, like in a subtle way, that there's more to these laws of physics than just merely describing things. And in that sense, they have some sort of like deeper explanatory power. But of course, there's always the question of what are we standing on? What is it that we're standing on? This question is the most difficult. We all need something to stand on. Are we just picking ourselves up by our bootstraps? Alex here asked, where did these laws come from? Maybe where they came from or what they are is a brute fact, but the question is tied to their origin. And here's where it gets interesting, because for there to be laws of physics, there need to be things for them to describe. Laws of physics don't exist in a vacuum. If they're there, then there's obviously things for them to describe. And these things they are describing would have to have begun if and when the laws themselves began. So how can these laws describe the origin of the universe? And yet, for them to even have been in existence, the universe had to exist first. Science is just, he pushed this idea, he still pushed on this idea that science is just a description within the universe. And if it's just merely a description within the universe, then the laws of physics, to some extent, do not even have the ability to explain to us how the universe began. And I felt like this was the strongest point of contention throughout the whole argument. It's almost like, what are the laws of physics even primarily doing? If you're ascribing to them this level of deeper explanatory power, what are they really doing? Sean Carroll kind of pushed back mildly and said, look, it depends with what it is you're asking. Are you asking for the description of the first moment, how the universe began? Well, science can give you that. It can give you that. But if you're looking for a reason why the universe came into existence at all, like why is the universe here? Why did it come into existence? Science can't give you that. Science just can't answer that question. So here's where Alex said, so is that the job of philosophy? Then? Is that the space where philosophy has to get in and science has to take its hands off? And then Sean Carroll did not explicitly say yes, but he was like, look at it this way. That's not a well-formed question. And nobody should feel the need to deserve a reason why. Yeah. One thing that you can take comfort from, I thought Sean Carroll was trying to say, one thing that you can take comfort from, in as much as we are telling you, no, that question doesn't even warrant an explanation or a reason. You shouldn't feel the need to try to explain that question, like why is the universe here? But one thing you can take some sort of like consolation from is that things don't just happen randomly. The laws of physics have showed us that things don't just happen randomly. We might not be able to understand the universe and where it came from in any deeper, substantial sense. But one thing you can take consolation from is that things don't just pop into existence out of nothing. Things that maybe saying out of nothing is conflating the question with a bunch of all other philosophical things that require further explaining. But let me just say, Sean was simply trying to say things just don't happen randomly. And the reason why we know this is because everything is best explained by patterns that we've come to understand through the laws of physics. So things just can't pop out of nowhere. And the universe equally can just pop out of nowhere. And because of that, we can simply situate ourselves in a comfortable place and just say it's a brute fact. Obviously, this conversation can go in many different ways. It can go in various other different ways. But Sean also admitted something. He was like, perhaps these same laws of physics that I'm ascribing a lot of importance to can be explained by even something deeper at the base of them all, or something metaphysically deeper than the laws of physics themselves. But that we don't know with absolute certainty what that explanation can look like or what it is. And I definitely agree with that. So that's the first 18 minutes of the conversation. At this point, to even further what they're talking about, they get into the conversation on fine-tuning the ins and outs and stuff like that. But all I can say is go watch the conversation and let me know what you think and what you think are the reaches of science. Can science essentially at the end of the day explain anything? What is science even doing? You know what I mean?